Often where we come from defines an important part of our identity. Our story in a modern multicultural Australia is still only in its opening chapters. But understanding how Indigenous Australians arrived many thousands of years before provides significant insights into the tale of our origins as a species.
We look at the fossil record and we consider these questions of similarities and differences and possible origins of populations. It actually tells us a story about us as human beings, about our own origins, where we came from, how we relate to each other. It's a global story. It's the story of our species.
Associate Professor Darren Curnow from the University of New South Wales is an archaeologist and evolutionary biologist. His latest research paper compares the cranial thickness of two Australian fossilised skulls in order to determine the dominant theory of human migration to the region.
The Willandra Lakes in southwest New South Wales, which includes Lake Mungo, has provided the earliest evidence for human occupation, human settlement of Australia. And that includes the earliest human remains that have been found on this continent. Lake Mungo 3, or Willandra Lakes Human 3, is dated to around 40 to 45,000 years old. So it's the oldest physical evidence we have for human remains in Australia. Willandra Lakes Human 50 is quite a bit younger, perhaps between about 15 to 20,000 years old.
Professor Curnow's findings support the theory colloquially known as the out of Africa model. It's a theory that holds that modern humans evolved relatively recently in Africa and expanded outwards over the globe.
What our work shows is that these two ancient Australian skulls are very much alike, and that they both really provide strong support for this idea that Aboriginal Australians, like all other modern humans, descend from an early African population.
Marchie Henneberg is a professor of anthropological and comparative anatomy at the University of Adelaide. He supports an alternative theory to the out of Africa model that sees modern humans evolving from populations of our predecessors, Homo erectus, already distributed around the globe. Currently in Zurich, Switzerland, as part of a lecture tour, Professor Henneberg had to be contacted via video conference.
There is no point of origin, there is no specific year in which humans were created. Humans emerged from among some earlier populations of their ancestors in a process that took a number of generations.
Peter White is a former archaeologist and current editor of the journal Archaeology in Oceania. Agreeing with Professor Curnow's research, he is also a proponent of the out of Africa model.
It's the single origin theory, if you like, is probably the best way to describe it. And that's, in my view, the most commonly accepted one.
However, Professor Henneberg argues that a single origin of migration is unlikely, and mentioned that as a theory it is intellectually based in a British brand of colonialism.
I don't think that there was just one migration event. People, boom, came into Australia, let's say 50,000 years ago, closed the border and settled in and never contacted other populations, or Australia was never visited or settled by other groups of people. There was a constant flow of people across Southeast Asia into Northern Australia.
I think that paper supports the idea of a single origin of Australian Aborigines. What he says is that the measurements that he's taken on the two major pieces of human skeletal material, WLH3 and WLH50, are not sufficiently different that one derives from a different source than the other, so that he's in fact basically supporting a unitary model of Australian settlement.
Professor Curnow's study draws big conclusions from research on the remains of only two partial skulls. Such small samples indicate the scarcity of fossil evidence in archaeology, part of what Professor Curnow calls the nature of the business.
In our particular study, of course, we focused on only two partial skulls. And the reason for that was because these are two of the most important skulls that have been discussed in the context of the origins of Aboriginal Australians, and we felt that they were really, if you like, an important test of the competing ideas that are being discussed by scientists.
But where does the value in Professor Curnow's research lie? Both Professor Henneberg and Peter White agree that there are lessons to be learnt in the present by studying our past.
We are all humans, we are all similar, we are members of the same big evolved human population that lived across all continents for a very long time and intermingled constantly and exchanged both genetic and cultural information. So we are simply all members of the same family.
What archaeology does is challenge our understanding of what we think we know about people in different parts of the world, because in a great many places what we observed, what we have written down, was of societies already disrupted. It's true in the Americas, it's true in New Guinea, it's true indeed in much of Asia. So that archaeology can tell us more about the societies as they really were, rather than when they had already been disrupted.